didn't have the heart to do that to the baby. Then he thought about what would be the simplest way to make someone throw up. He could wait till someone was ill. No, that would take too long to wait for a friend to become ill and hover over their toilet waiting to collect what they spewed. He could invite a friend over to eat something that was perhaps spoiled from the refrigerator. No, that didn't seem reasonable. Then it came to him. Alcohol. Alcohol always makes people do stupid things. He could encourage his friends to imbibe beyond their capacity and wait for them to hurl. Perfect. Jake invited his friend Greg over the next night his parents were away. Jake offered Greg a drink. Greg accepted and was happily surprised when Jake carried a case of beer out of the kitchen. With abandon common to teens, Greg drank can after can of beer, continuing even as his speech slurred. Always the accommodating host, Jake went to get a large soup pot from the kitchen. He instructed Greg that if he was going to be sick, that he should use the pot instead of the bathroom. Well, minutes later, Greg was violently vomiting into the stainless steel pot. Greg stopped puking when his stomach was empty, and the pot was half full. Jake took the pot into the kitchen. Jake returned to a sleeping Greg on the couch. When he was certain that Greg was comatose for the night, Jake returned to the kitchen. He stared down into the pot of frothy soup. He peeked out the doorway to see if Greg had moved. He hadn't. When Jake was satisfied that Greg would not wake up, he returned to the pot to test his theory. Jake lifted the rim of the pot to his lips and drank. The sour stench was horrid. He continued to drink the warm, vile, thick, slimy, syrupy, sour cocktail. He put the pot down, expecting his body to revolt against this offering, and just as with the baby's vomit, it didn't. He went to the pantry and grabbed a package of chocolate cupcakes, something he had craved ever since he became ill. He ate the two in single bites, and then waited nervously for his body to reject them. But it didn't. He went back to the pantry and continued to eat and sample everything that he had been craving for months. Then he went back for seconds and thirds until he was full. He was full. He couldn't believe that he was experiencing being satisfied by food again. He was so happy and proud of his solution. He found his own cure when all those doctors failed him and had predicted a short life attached to an intravenous bag. He cleaned up the pot and the wrappers from his feeding frenzy and settled down in the chair in the living room next to where Greg lay passed out. He thought about what had happened with his nephew, and now again tonight. If he were going to survive with his affliction, he needed to continue to consume the regurgitation of others. He needed to devise a guise that would allow him to do this, and this is how the parties came to be. He was never going to return to the mercy of just surviving on fluids again. He was going to be damned if he did, or dead if he didn't. He chose the drinking of the vile fluid instead of the slow, wasting death of the intravenous bag. In the months that followed, he devised a more pleasant way to make the liquid deposits from his party guests more palatable for consumption. He began to create menus for his guests that would alter their contribution so as to increase their appetites and his cravings. Many nights his friends would arrive to a table full of delectable chocolate treats, chocolate cakes, pies, eclairs, and puddings. In return, Jake would reap the benefits of the menu served. After the party, he sat down to his feast with a mug full of the frothy, chocolatey-flavored vomit. He would change the menu every week to satisfy his cravings. One week, he only served fruit, and enjoyed a fruity vomit smoothie with his meal. Other times, he went the ethnic route. Jake was able to continue the pattern for about 3 months, when something in his body changed. Food digestion that would normally require 1 or 2 mugs of regurgitation was now taking 8 to 10 full mugs. He consumed increasing quantities of vomit and less food during a feeding, resulting in taking in fewer usable nutrients as each week passed. Jake continued the daily intravenous sessions, but without real food he felt himself withering away. He wasn't sure how to increase the potency in the stomach acids which he was stealing from the vomit. He continued to throw the weekly parties, only to get less and less satisfaction from his feedings. His illness reached a new high when, after the last party, His feast only lasted 3 mouthfuls before he vomited. Attempting to soothe his stomach, he drank another mug full. He consumed nearly 12 helpings of the puke before he rendered himself too full to eat anything else. He went to bed that evening hungry for the first time. He didn't know what to do. He attended school during the week, hoping in some strange way that his condition might reverse, allowing him to resume the vomit shakes to digest his food. He waited anxiously for the weekend to arrive. The partygoers came, puked, and left. Jake was anxious to attempt to eat something. When he thought the house was empty, he headed to the patio to feed from the barrel, but he was distracted by the sound of snoring. He turned and found Jody, a girl he knew from science class, asleep on his couch. He liked her and thought she was both funny and attractive. She had told him that her parents were getting a divorce and that she was going through a rough time. She had started to attend his parties to drown her sorrows in alcohol. The ache in his belly reminded him that it was time to eat. It also reminded him of his problem of getting less and less satisfaction from the contents of the barrel. He convinced himself that drinking directly from someone, without their stomach contents being diluted in the community barrel, would provide a chance to eat normally again. He went to the basement and gathered rope and duct tape. He gently tied the girl's hands and feet to the couch. Then he moved quickly and placed the tape over her mouth to keep her silent during his meal. She awoke as Jake applied the tape to her lips. Her eyes widened as she found herself bound and gagged as well. In an attempt to scream, she was only able to muster out a low-pitched moan. She struggled at her bindings, only to have Jake tighten them accordingly as he noticed her movements loosen their grip. Jake went into the kitchen and brought back a fillet knife. He looked down at Jody and slowly cut her blouse from her waist to the bottom of her bra. Her bare belly was now exposed to him. He knelt at her side and took the knife and dragged the blade gently across the skin of her belly. A small trickle of blood oozed from the wound. Jody continued her muffled pleas as tears streamed down her cheeks. He cut 2 more slits in the skin to form a flap. He wanted to be careful, as not to cut too deep, so as not to damage the stomach and its contents within. Jody remained conscious until Jake began cutting and peeling away the muscle tissue that covered her stomach. He lifted the last layer of flesh, exposing her stomach to him, as a loss of blood anesthetized Jody, and she bled out. Jake knew his time was growing short as she expired. His mouth watered at the anticipation of devouring the life-giving liquid beneath his hand as he unearthed it from its flesh prison. He squealed in delight as the contents of her stomach moved around under the pressure of his touch. He took the knife and placed a small puncture on the surface of the stomach. Air escaped from the hole before a spurt of fluid sprayed upward. He couldn't wait any longer. He leaned over his victim and enlarged the incision with the knife. He was amazed at how easy the lining of the stomach cut. The contents began to flow faster than he expected. He reached down in an attempt to keep the fluids from escaping too quickly. He pressed his mouth to the opening and slurped its contents. He felt invigorated, then carnivorous, tearing at the flesh. Without hesitation, he buried his face into the liquid-filled pillow of the stomach beneath. He submerged his entire face into the warm fluid. He drank as if he had never eaten before. Unexpectedly, he was surprised to feel the surface of his skin begin to burn. He never thought about the effects of the stomach acids coming in contact with his skin. He quickly ignored the thought, and was more concerned with the walls of the stomach collapsing and the remaining contents spilling wasted onto the floor. The liquid continued to burn his face and eyes as he ate. The stomach fluids and other chewy contents quickly satisfied his hunger. His skin continued to burn as the acids digested his face as he ate. He lifted his face from his feast and inhaled deeply. What a feeling, he thought. He felt great. He looked down at the human buffet before him. His vision began to blur and deteriorate as the burning fluid dripped down his head into his eyes. Ignoring this, he plunged his head down a second time, feasting on his victim. As he finished the liquid contents, he came across the remnants of his victim's last meal at the bottom of her stomach. He chewed the soft, gooey morsels as he sucked them into his mouth. When all was gone, he heard the voice of someone calling Jody's name from outside. A moment later, the girl's father walked through the front door with a view of Jake kneeling at the side of the human buffet that was once his daughter. After the trial, Jake was found to be clinically insane. His addiction to eating or drinking from his victims didn't bode well with the jury. They sentenced him to life in the New Jersey State Mental Institution. His blind, skeletal frame lay day in and day out, strapped to his bunk, sustained by nutrition catheters taped to his arms.
I say every house in America should have an electric chair. And every man just once in his life should sit in it, just so that he can feel the power of millions of gallons of electricity flow through his veins. I got an electric chair, that's all I need. You get an electric chair, Sheldon, you don't have to worry about the audience. You get an electric chair, you can tell them anything you want, as long as it's real. You get yourself an electric chair and they'll sit there all night long. Kind of a funny idea, sitting in an electric chair and doing a show. Well, think of the therapeutic value of an electric chair and all the money it is. Yes, sir, an electric chair in every home.
The Electric Chair, a show about horror. ElectricChairShow.com.
An electric chair. Wow.
E.S. Wynn is the author of over 30 books and the chief editor of Thunderoon Publishing. He manages dozens of websites, has written hundreds of articles and short stories for a number of publications, has taught classes in literature, marketing, math, spirituality, and guided meditation, voiced 15 albums as a voice actor, and even spent time working as a model for stock photography.
In His Image by E.S. Wynn. When they take you, it's like being eaten alive. The machines, I remember the way they move, each limb flexing, stabbing, serrated and cruel. I remember the way they hummed, the way they pierced and knitted skin. I remember the sensation of their nanomechanical venom as it ate into my body, shredding flesh and bone into protein mush for the synthesizers. There's a lot of the process I don't remember. Long gulfs of depthless darkness that hang between shattered fragments of memory. Most of it is images, flashes, bundles of flexible hose surging with neon liquid, slowly replacing thickening crimson with nanomechanical life, boiling away everything that made me human, everything that made me different from them, from the surgeons. They only take certain parts of you, only use the nanites on certain areas of your body, parts of you don't need once the new machinery is wired into what's left. You catch glimpses of them sometimes during the procedure, patchwork faces silent and impassive as they wash in and out of the foggy crimson vertigo. But you never see their tools. You only feel them, hear them as they work, always clicking as they cut, clicking as they sew, clicking, clicking. Very little of what they stitch back into you is meat, and none of it is your own. Long, flat fingers as cold as sterile steel trace lengths of viscera, make tiny incisions as they go. Cut here, the marks say, and the machines obey. They remove each piece so carefully, so precisely that it seems almost as if it were a form of art. The graft comes just as gracefully, and it is only when it is allowed to grow that the graft becomes cold and inhuman, distended and pregnant with a festering and insidious potential. Other hands excise will and spirit, graft sheets of dull composite to cover the empty spaces, sheets that provide a wall against the festering growths within, keep them from spreading. These too are processed into the machinery, reworked and forged into a sense of self that meshes well with that of the surgeons. Only in the end, when the last machine withdraws and the last pair of cold hands lowers you into your case, do you realize that you are now one of them, that you are one of the drones, part of their machine, a surgeon. In the reflection you catch on the edge of the case as they lower the lid to seal you in, you are confronted with your